Welcome. My name is William Messakar. I am a master model railroader in the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. I want to welcome all of you to the virtual layout tour we'll have presented today by members of the NMRA. We would encourage you to find out about the NMRA and join in order to participate in these virtual tours. We have other virtual clinics and other activities for the National Model Railroad Association that we think you'll find a big help to your modeling, and you'll get to meet model railroaders just like you. So welcome to our tour, and I hope you enjoy it.
First off, thank you very much for inviting me. I do appreciate it. I'm not from your division. There's a division to the north of you. Although I think a number of people who are on the attendee list may have operated up here during band rail. I know Burr has for sure. I think Greg Wright's on the video as well. My son Isaac is kindly helping with the technology and the videoing. So, it's shaky. It's not me, it's him. Although I'm shaking a little bit too. So first, welcome to the Columbian Western. My name is Mark Kent. I've been a model railroader since I was about 10, although I took a big jump out of there. So that would have been in the 70s. But I took a big jump out of there when I went to work. I was out of the hobby until about 2005, which is when I started constructing this layout. It was fully operational in about 2008, and we had our first operating session then. And we've had about 70 operating sessions since then, but of course we haven't operated in about a year, which is unfortunate because the layout was designed for operations. It follows the Canadian Pacific boundary subdivision. So we'll do a few slides about the prototype, and then we'll do a walk around so you can see how the layout is constructed, and then we're going to run the train. So the prototype is in British Columbia, southeastern British Columbia, an area called the Kootenays, named for the Kootenai River. So the railroads in this area were built in the 1890s when silver and copper were discovered. And the Canadian James Hill decided to try and suck all the ore out of British Columbia and feed his smelters, which are just below the boundary subdivision, just below the boundary between the U.S. and Canada. And because the Canadian Pacific main line was several hundred miles north, there was nothing protecting him from doing that, preventing him from doing that. So the Canadian Pacific, with the help of the Canadian government, the British Columbia government, built a series of rail lines just north of the border called the Southern Main Line, which included the Kettle Valley Division, to help try and cut off James Hill from getting access to all that ore. So very interesting political history. So the boundary subdivision was built around 1898 and completed around 1910. And started in Nelson and went westward along the Kootenai River to the junction with the Columbia River at Castlegar. There on the Roslyn subdivision down to the Tayden smelter, the Kootenai smelter, the trail. So the boundary subdivision continued across the Monashee Pass at Barron and down into the Cascade, terminated initially at Grand Forks, where there was a large lumber mill and smelter. That was then continued on to Midway, where it met up with the Kettle Valley Division. So that's the boundary subdivision, which is the primary area that I model in my layout, the Columbian Western. There's also a major branch up the Spokane Valley, the Spokane City, where there's a major mill. There was a rail barge that took the train, the boost locomotive and all, up the Spokane Lake to Rosebery, where it connected with the Caslo subdivision, which initially was a narrow gauge line running from Caslo to Sanding. But in 1970, was a center gauge line that ran up from the cusp on the Columbia River on the upper LA Lake. So I had imagined that this isolated branch line would be very interesting for me to operate by myself in between operating sessions, because it's really a once a week kind of job, very slow paced, switching intensive. And that forms effectively the second layout that I model in the middle of my layout room, which you'll see. So, of course, any kind of mountain railway has to follow the water lines as much as it can. And to get between the valleys, you have to cross passes. And the boundary subdivision had two mountain passes, one at Farron and one at Eagle. And the one that I model with pusher jobs is at the Farron 2,500-foot climb from both Castlegar and Cascade up to the summit at Farron. Farron was interesting because it was a pusher station at the summit as opposed to at the base. And this was something that kind of really spiked my imagination. Bill was talking about what spiked his imagination with the RGS. Well, for me, it was the idea of families of pushers and their crews resident up at Farron Summit, which we get 30 to 40 foot of snow per year, waiting to be called to their jobs. And from Farron, they would be dispatched either to Cascade or to Castlegar, and then push the jobs uphill. So I model that summit. I don't model the whole summit. My layout effectively stops at Cascade. So it's a 4-deck layout, although during operations, you really only interact with 1 or 2 decks. The lowest deck, which only I use, is actually the storage deck. It includes and you'll see this when I pull it out, it includes an 8-track indexing table capable of holding 8 complete trains. And I use that as a fiddle yard between sessions to fiddle the trains, change the makeup, and make sure everything's going in the right direction. That feeds the layout through 2 helixes, which connect to staging tracks, which are just out of sight from the visible portions of the line. So there's very little hidden running during operations. So this is the lowest deck, 2.5 feet off the floor. The next deck, which is the main deck, is the level 2, which is 42 inches above the floor. It includes all the intensive switching areas, so the yard trackage, the Silcan branch, and then the pulp trackage at Castle Guard. The Contaferron on both sides is the next deck. It includes some pretty deep seams. So the main peninsula section in the middle is actually a single deck seam, which you'll see, and then the snow seams at Ferron, and heading down back to Cascade. The 4th deck is actually accessed only by the car barge. That's the Castle branch that sits above the Silcan branch, and the inside of the mushroom. So the peninsula is actually what I call a double mushroom, with a single middle deck facing outwards and the 2 inner decks facing inwards. So the picture of the mushroom with me looking much younger there, a long time ago. So that would have been about 2010. I didn't set out to design a double mushroom, it just kind of happened. You penetrate the mushroom with a swing gate and at 42 inches, and the branch line train goes into the mushroom, operates in the lower level, which you continue operating, and there's a pull-out step for operating the upper deck. You'll see that. But the actual contest to the Ferron is actually a single deck visible from a single visible deck visible from the outside of the mushroom. So a few important specs. I think probably most important was the timeline. So I was fortunate enough to be able to take time off work for a couple of years, from 2005 to 2008, and I was able to focus nearly full-time on construction. It was a single-person construction. And we had, as I said, our first operating session in 2008, and we've had about 70 since then. We operate with Timetable and Train Order. I enjoy operations a great deal. I enjoy the social aspect of it. From a size point of view, the layout fills the majority of a 2-car garage. It's about 350 square feet, 7 square miles long with a 2-mile branch line. And complexity-wise, there's about 200 switches, about 1/3 of which are powered using tortoises. What else is interesting? The train order stations, there's 6 of them. They're controlled by a dispatcher panel who sits in the crew lounge. That's a big word for it. It's a 100 square foot place with a desk and a couch. So it's not, the lounge is much too sophisticated over there. There's about 40 locomotives and 300 to 400 cars that are used in any one operating session. And I try to have all the guest trains sound equipped in some manner. Okay, so we'll do a walk around tour. So so I'll give you a quick overview. I'm wearing a headset so that we have good connection, but I'll take this off before we start running a train so you can hear the sound of the locomotives. So I chose a configuration for the track time which tries to optimize the amount of space I had available. And mathematically, that's a double deck or multi-deck around the wall configuration. In order to get into the layout room, we have to use gates, and I'll show you those swing gates as well. But here's an example of the construction. So this is Ferron Summit. It's at 54 inches height. So it's 64 inches height, which is a good height for me. I'm about 6 foot tall. These heights are ideal for a 6 foot tall person. Burr kind of bumps his head on the ceiling in a few places. And we have a 42-inch deck here, which is Nelson Yard. So Nelson was a division point yard, is a division point yard in my layout. It was a division point yard in the prototype. And to the east, so actually configuration, orientation-wise, the Canadian Pacific ran along the southern edge of the water features, the rivers and lakes in most cases. So we're actually standing in Yarway looking south. So we actually have west to our right and east to our left, which is a little counterintuitive, but you get used to it fairly quickly. Most intents and purposes, the layout starts in Nelson, but I, as the home of the crew, will actually operate trains from East Staging, which is Cranbrook and Preston. I'll operate those under yard limits into the yard in order to keep the yard fluid. The layout supports about 7 or 8 operators during an operating session. 2 of them will be dedicated to Nelson Yard. Nelson's main features are a diesel shop in the middle of the yard, which is scratch built. Actually, all the buildings here are scratch built after the prototype. It's very fortunate to have a very well documented prototype. In the process of building this out now, so I've been building structures now for 4 or 5 years. Not my favorite part of the hobby, but it's better where I'm at. So Nelson Yard is a division point. We have Nelson Subdivision running from Nelson to Cranbrook to the east. As I mentioned, I bring in trains from Hidden Sea, where to keep things fluid under yard limits. And then we run under Timetable and Train Order to the west along the boundary. Well, we have the summit at Fairland. So we're going to move west now to our right on the Kootenai River. So we see the Kootenai River here. This is the bridge at Tayden, which is where the Kootenai River narrows down. So Kootenai Lake narrows down to become Kootenai River. This was compressed about 50%. The prototype actually has a crossing of 2 islands, where I have a single island. Here we have the line falling down from Farron down to Cascade. And on my left, which is your right, we have Corkendall. We'll see a meet there. Corkendall is a very long siding, which was effective for meeting the trains. Here we have the junction at Castlegar. This is a train coming off the Roslyn subdivision from Tadnac, from the smelter. One of the interesting features of the prototype was the heavy use of Fairbanks Morse design locomotives that were constructed at Canadian Locomotives Company in London, Ontario, CLC. So there's a large mix. There was primarily FM in 1970, but there was also GE and Alco designs as well. So you see all of those in a variety of paint schemes. So the color schemes and the mix of locomotives and cars are appropriate for 1970. In Castlegar, which occupies a portion of the full operating session, there's also a sawmill and a large pulp mill, which is the Celgar mill. So initially, the boundary subdivision was developed by the prototype for extraction of mineral resources, copper and lead and zinc and silver. But as it was played out, it became more and more forest products. So we see a lot of lumber mills, pole mills, and the pulp mill. The pulp mill itself actually was to create pulp that went to Edmonton for creation of rayon for use in clothing. And above Castlegar, we have the Kettle River Bridge. This is a full-size bridge, model full-size, 5th crossing of the Kettle. And then we have the foot of the grade at Cascade. And then we have hidden staging representing Grand Forks and Midway. This scene here, my hope was actually, I was very inspired by the New England Berkshire and Western as I was growing up, the Rensselaer Polytechnic Club layout. And if any of you remember the scene of the Champlain Lake, I think it's like Champlain, the Red Rock scene, this was my intention there, was to talk about the Red Rock scene. Without a lot of experience designing layouts, I decided I want a very long, deep scene of tree-lined areas. But I didn't realize how many trees I was going to consume. My estimate was probably about 2,000 or 3,000 trees in this one scene here. So that's the boundary subdivision. But as I mentioned, there's also the Socan and the Caso subdivisions. They're inside the mushroom. In order to get to that subdivision, there's a swing gate that swings out from underneath Corkendall that meets up with the main line here. This is Socan Junction. It's actually based on a bicycle neck. It runs nice and level, so you can actually park cars at the industries on the swing gate. This is swung out twice during an operating session for the entrance and exit of the trains. So you swing this out here, and then the Y junction connects to the Socan subdivision. Actually, while we're here, I mentioned that in order to get inside the layout, there are a couple of swing gates. They're here. This is the one that the operators will use. They need to, for example, leave to go to get a drink or use the bathroom or whatever during an operating session. And above it, for the crew lounge, is a gate that's actually locked in place during the session. This opens up and includes the light panel and everything. So this whole section actually swings in the other direction. But I won't touch it now because it's all set up for operations. So here's the double mushroom. You might be able to get a view inside. You actually get an idea of how it looks. So to your right on the lower level is the Socan subdivision, which winds its way up the Socan River. Very placid, very calm, very nice little place, kind of a lost backwoods area. We have Balakin, and then we have a couple of small bridges. And the track swings into Socan City, which is at the south end of Socan Lake, where there's a major sawmill. This sawmill originates at least a dozen cars per operating session of chip hoppers and cut lumber. And interesting enough, is one of the main features is actually the car barge. The car barge actually was used to take the trains all the way up to the Castle subdivision. And they would actually load the locomotives and the cabooses at the same time and take the whole train up. And this is a picture. This is a Doug Wingfield picture of the operation. And this is one of the things that kind of inspired me to model the whole area. A beautiful paint job on the ISG tug. This was operational up until the late 70s, early 80s. So it fits my time frame. And it's because of that operation, I was actually able to create a fourth deck. I don't think I would have had the imagination to actually imagine using a barge to take a train up to another level. So I'm just going to step outside. I'm going to pull out the step that we used to operate the Castle subdivision. This runs on the rail, the box. And then we can get on top of it. And I do this once per session. So after the operators are finished switching out the Socan subdivision, I will take the barge, and lift the barge up and put it up here on Rosebery and pull out the step. Power is transferred to these copper wipers, brass wipers, on the back of the barge, and they contact metal pilings, which provide also mechanical indexing. And then the slips are actually made out of soldered brass, so they're nice and strong. So we don't have touch wood, we don't have anything damage during operating sessions. So the train is unloaded from the barge, backs up into the yard. There's actually a hidden staging for the new damper that penetrates the backdrop. And then the train runs over the Summit Lake and down into the cusp. And the configuration in the cusp is actually a combination of the track before and after the lower lake was flooded with a huge Kingsley side dam. So we have the configuration of new Cusp in the back, and the configuration of old Cusp, which is before the lake was flooded. So we have pole mills and sawmills and shake mills and some oil dealerships here. So this job running from Nelson into the Socan and up to Castle, up to the Cusp, would take at least a full 3, maybe 4 hours during an operating session. So we have at least half of the jobs that we run during an operating session run the full length of the operating session. That was one of the objectives I had. I wanted to have very long jobs as opposed to short jobs. Okay, so we're going to run a train now, and then we'll take questions. I'm going to take the headphones off so you guys can hear the sound. Here's where we get to see whether the train held together in the tunnel, or whether we're just going to have the locomotives coming out with no train behind it. So this is train 81. It's the only numbered train that's running westbound on this section of the layout during an operating session, so it has security rules very little. We'll probably meet a couple of trains that have flags on them designated as extras. Running westbound, I actually imagine that the copper fields to the west of Nelson are still active, and actually the connection to the main line through the Kettle Valley is active as well. So we actually run through trains, which wouldn't have been run in 1970. We also run pushers, which would have been stopped at the one to let the prototype dieselized. But my railroad, I get to do what I want. So we're running through Shields, and we're going to run across McCormick Creek Bridge. It's a big curved trestle. So all the major bridges on the Columbia subdivision have been modeled except for the one across the Kootenai River, so 78. Interesting story about the plans, the Kootenai plans. I had a good relationship with the community visitor archives until about 2005 when they went dead on me. Turned out that they actually shut down when the gentleman retired. I had no access to plans anymore. At that time, I was actually working in a company where one of our major investors was also a major investor in Kootenai Pacific. And he put me in contact with the investor relations manager. So it's kind of useful to have that kind of connection. I asked for some plans from the investor relations manager. And about 3 weeks later, I had two huge boxes, about 700 plans show up to my door. It's good to know these people. This is Barge Bridge. It's a pin-tested bridge made of edge brass of 300 links. And Barge Creek. When you study any of the prototype shots of these the Pacific Northwest trestles, you realize that many times you can't actually see the bridge at all. All you can see is trees. So I kept adding more and more trees to try and get the image I wanted. But then you start realizing you don't see the bridges anymore. So it's turning into Kootenai. We're the extra 4080. This is one of the ore trains, which would have used the pusher to get to the summit. It's now going down to, it's going to head to Kootenai, to the smelter at Kootenai. For a variety of copper ores. Kootenai was a manned train order station. And you can see that there's a train order goes down to the eastbound, nothing for us. But what we're going to do is when we pass the train order station is we're actually going to protect our train. So I'm actually going to press a button, which is going to wait until the train passes, and then it's going to drop the board behind our caboose and keep it down for 20 scale minutes to make sure that any train that's following us is going to be properly spaced out. So we're heading up Puck Creek, swinging away from the lower lake, up Puck Creek. We're going to pierce Bulldog Mountain through Bulldog Tunnel. It's about 1 kilometer, so about 2/3 of a mile in length. I actually biked through it a couple of times. I'm actually very worried about running into bears in that tunnel. And when we come out of Bulldog, we're actually crossing Porcupine Fill in the snow scene. Quite important to me to actually model the snow scene because, as I mentioned, the image in my head of those families living through 30-foot snow rivers. The snow is actually a hydrocal. It uses I use my Ganneman's techniques for most of the snow. As I mentioned, I've been adding buildings to the layout. I've been really trying to add as many lights as I can. All the lighting is LED. If I had to do it over again, I would actually make sure that I ran a low voltage line, 3-volt line, when I run the power lines to the main line. I've actually tapped into the DCC power bus to power the LEDs using drop-in resistors. But as a result, 2/3 of the power is actually lost in the drop-in resistors. I'm lucky enough that my DCC system has enough power to do it, but the better route would be to use a 3-volt bus that run around the wall. Specifically for lighting. We're dropping down through Fair now. Heading down Paulson Creek. We'll come to the first of 2 snow sheds. Those snow sheds were made from laser cut vents, and then the cross members were added manually afterwards. this shed was actually visible from Highway 3A for a long time. So that's disassembled and replaced by a slide fence. I'm running it quite a bit faster than we run during the operating session, since the camera on. Passing through Paulson, right before that. We're coming up to the second of the two snow sheds. This is a third snow shed. This one actually didn't go across the water feature at all. It's just a pure slide path. The slide bridge, which is the same. There's no creek here, it's just a slide path. So a three-girder bridge. Get us across the slide path. Into Rafferty. There's famous for Jonathan there. Mr. Jonathan there, let's be good. Did a beautiful job painting. This area. So a normal operating session, it would take quite a bit longer to get down the hill. First off, it would be a 30-minute break check at the summit, and then there would be thermal tests at the different sidings as well on the way down the hill. Actually, for the train this night, we would either use pushers to get up, or we would actually double the hill, more likely. Passing an old limestone tipple, which is owned by Tomago. The limestone we use as slugs in the smelter down the trail, and then lumber reload. Now the scenery on this side of the Fern Hill is much drier, more barren. A lot of ponderosa trees, ponderosa pines, spaced out more than you see on the east side of the weather. More lodgepole pines on the east side of the hill. And slowing down as we come to the crossing of the Kettle River. Pulling into Cascade. And here we're meeting our eastbound counterpart. This is actually 8715. This 8715 is bringing loaded wood chip hoppers from the mills from Midway and from Grand Forks, which will go to the pulp mill at Castlebar, as well as some food freight. And this is where I'll tie up. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of what it's like to operate across the Barren Summit. Normally, this, as I mentioned, this job would either be pushed from the base of Shields, or would have been doubled probably from Barren to Shields. So this one job could easily take you an hour and a half to get across the summit. Do you have any questions? Because that's the end of our demo.
Mark, we had one question. What is the little yellow thing at the end of the barges?
Oh, that's a winch. That's a very good question. So the train only ran up to Rosebery once per week. However, through the week, there would have been a train that ran from Nelson to Spokane City. And if there was additional cars that wouldn't fit on a single barge, they would actually be barged up separately. So the cars would be winched on, would be dropped, so it would be placed on the barge by the locomotive. Then the barge would be taken up without locomotive to Rosebery, and the winch would be used to winch on or off the car. Third answer was it was a winch.
Does anyone else want to ask a question?
Mark, this for a Signer. It's an incredibly impressive layout. What's the grade you use on the your main lines?
It's the same as the prototype, 2.2% max. It was
Wow.
very fun, and I was very fortunate. I mean, I'm very fortunate. the prototype I chose because the FM units in 1970 were pretty much on the end of their life. So they used to put 4 locomotives on a train of 5 or 6 cars in some cases, because they'd be picking up a lot of loaded cars on the other side. They'd be guaranteed to lose 1 locomotive on the way there and 1 locomotive on the way back. So you have these, very impressive consists of locomotives pulling very short trains over steep hills. So it's a great very modelable prototype. And one of the problems with that was that when I came to design that, I couldn't think of anything I didn't want to model. I wanted to keep everything. So that, as a result, I ended up trying to cram everything in, which forced me to have to go vertical, which ended up with a more complicated layout than I originally intended to build.
So how long has it taken you to build the layout to where you are now?
Well, I started in 2005, but the majority of the construction occurred between 2005 and 2008. So it was physically 100% complete and operable, every piece of track, by 2008. Since then, it's been scenery and probably 2 years just building bridges and structures. And then I made a major mistake about 6 years ago, and we got a dog. That cut the modeling time in half. So I got more exercise, but I had much less time.
So you designed the layout and actually completed it from start to finish in that time frame.
Correct.
Did you have to make any modifications to your original plan?
Very, very few. Very, very few. I mean, I followed the prototype, so most things I wanted to do, and I became more of a prototype modeler as I went along. Because I followed the prototype from a track planning point of view, most of the things I wanted to do were accommodated. We did find some stuff fairly quickly into the first operating sessions. We needed some additional locomotive capacity. I added a couple more industries, because there wasn't enough reason. I had a lot more trains, actually. I spent a lot of time building the second deck, but the prototype only ran 2 trains a day, 1 in each direction. And that wasn't satisfying to me. So I had a very good friend, Brian Pate, who some of you may know, a very, very excellent HON3 modeler. And he advised me that I could basically do whatever I wanted. And if I wanted to add more trains, I should do it. So we actually came up with some justification for running the pusher trains, and also for the pusher helpers, and also running the ore trains. And eventually I added a way freight as well. So we actually run 10 trains per day across the summit, whereas the prototype only ran 2. So that's one change. So we had to have a few changes to track to do that for very little. So
how often do you have operating sessions, assuming you could operate with groups now?
It would probably be once every 2 months. Again, we ran 70 operating sessions over 11 years.
Okay.
Would you have the ability to demonstrate the transfer table to us right now?
Oh, sure. I forgot to do that. So that's located down here in light on. So there's a flip down plexiglass panel. I use a lot of smoked plexiglass panels to hide what I don't want people to see. So inside here, you can actually see there's 8 staging tracks. This is also my programming table for DCC, and then you can just simply pull out transfer table. The index is out. You can hear the détentes clicking. So the détentes lock in the ends, but most importantly, there's actually a winch configuration, pulley configuration, of a cable that causes both ends to move parallel at the same time. So if I pull on one end, it doesn't camber over. It actually pulls both ends of the table at the same time. That keeps it running parallel.
And what's the height above the ground of that table?
This is about 2.5 feet.
Yeah.
But this isn't used during operating session. As I mentioned, this is just simply used as a fiddle yard between sessions. So this storage yard, the fiddle yard, actually feeds the staging tracks in several different directions. So it goes out to the left, it goes out through a helix, a wedding cake helix, which is over there against the wall. And that has 2 tracks on the top, and that's self-staging that represents TADMAC. In the other direction, there's a major helix inside here that has a 4-track staging yard in it. That's east staging. And on the top here, this is west staging. There's 2 tracks up here. So we have a total of 8 staging tracks that are fed from the storage yard between the sessions.
So can you go directly from the top level there down to the transfer table?
Yes, I can. So
Yeah.
this is useful for turning trains between sections as well. And there's also a turning loop on the storage level. So I can take trains down here, I can take them, turn them in a, there's actually a Y in here, I can turn the trains into a Y if necessary, take it out to the Nelson Yard, or I can bring them down. So this whole storage yard acts as a connector between all the different ends of the layout.
Do you have a YouTube channel where you have some of your videos about operations?
I do. I have a YouTube channel and videos. It's not as well updated as I'd like it to be, but yes,
Yeah.
we can provide that link. And there's actually a Flickr page. So the Flickr page is kept current for new projects as well.
When you did this, you used basically a shadow box effect to do all your scenes, of course, to get so many levels. Do you have any secrets to how you got all the scenery and details to the back versus the front?
Being young. At the time, I was young.
Yeah, we all were once.
At one point, yeah. I'll never build a layout like this again, ever. I mean, there's too much energy that went into it. I was incredibly fortunate to have the time and the resources to dedicate it. It's a one-man job, with the exception of the installation of the DCC system, the decoder, sorry. I've done everything else myself. Simply because I just find it's more efficient and I enjoy all the different aspects of the hobby. I'm just, it's actually a manageable size. It's the limit of what I'd be able to do, but I'd never be able to find the energy to do it again. And then the scenery and the backdrops just kind of evolved. I've always liked painted backdrops. I'm experimenting with photo backdrops now. You may have seen the experimental photo backdrop behind the Silkan Forest Products mill. That may work. My ability to actually paint buildings is very, very limited. I'm not like Steve Stark, who's very good at it.
Your artistry is fantastic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Definitely been a labor of love, as all our layouts are. I've been fortunate enough to operate on many of your layouts when I go down to Sound Rail as well.
Mark, did you build the entire layout yourself?
Yes, I did.
Wow.
Yeah. We have pretty small building lots in Vancouver. So this is a 33-foot lot with a 400 square foot garage on it. I don't have any other outbuildings, so I actually had to figure out a way to build it, and that I was able to actually have room to actually build the different modules and install them. And then when I finally finished building Nelson Yard, I installed it, and then I disassembled the saws and put them away. So I've been fortunate not to have to bring those out again.
Would you be willing to film the walking out of the room so we can see your computer where you do the dispatching and see the process of leaving the room?
Yeah, of course, that room, of course, hasn't been tidied up, so thank you for that, Burr. Here. So I use hardwood railings. These are cut on a trammel, a very shallow angle, and they're lubricated with lithium grease. This has run very well. So these gates have been in existence now for about 12 years, and they run fine. Now, this gate would normally be opened. I checked and open it now because they finished. So this would be opened and closed once per session. So that's something you want to do all the time. This is the crew lounge, the dispatcher's office. This is the dispatcher panel. It's a JMRI Panel Pro panel. It's just used to activate and clear the 6 train order signals. Well, it's clear now. This was the Corkendall signal that was down when we went past. Okay. So that's now cleared the semaphore signal at Kootenai River.
Very nice. And how about the call board? Can you show us that?
Sure. It's pretty straightforward. So all the jobs that are available are listed, and we use cards for people to pick randomly, or for randomly assigning the order in which people pick their jobs. And one thing that I do differently, or slightly differently, is personally when I go and operate on someone's layout, I'm scared to death about screwing up. So I like to understand what the level of complexity of each of the jobs are. So we actually use a ski hill analogy to actually rate the difficulty of each of the jobs from easy to challenging. So a double black diamond would be very, very challenging. We don't actually have any double black diamonds. We have a single black diamond job, which some of you guys would have done, which is the craft job. It is running from Nelson to Castlegar, switching out the pump mill and back. And that's a 3-hour job, something like that. But it can be very complicated. Any other questions?
So for an operator of a particular run, what's a typical time duration?
At least an hour. The yard jobs are full session jobs, so they're 4 hours. The Silcan and Castle branch is a 4-hour job. The craft job, which is a craft mill, would be 3 hours at least, maybe 4. And then the through freights are probably an hour and a half, something like that, 2 hours. So you can, when you actually have all the trains up and running, you have to adhere to the slow orders and your train orders. It can easily take you an hour and a half to 2 hours to get across the summit. The pusher jobs would be about an hour. So if you were operating on the layout, you'd operate at least 2 jobs, maybe 3, if you were not operating one of the dedicated jobs.
So during a session, there's not necessarily a whole bunch of social interaction going on. Guys are busy working their trains.
It could be, but I mean, this is the Kootenai, so things are pretty slow. We always have to entertain them, where people forget their orders and run over flagmen and stuff.
Incredibly impressive.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, Mark, I just wanted to mention thank you very much for the tour. I really enjoyed my visit. You got an incredible layout there. It's just incredible.
Well, like I said, when the COVID restrictions are lifted, you guys are all welcome.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Burr. Thank you for organizing, guys.
Hello again. This is another reminder that this virtual layout tour has been brought to you by members of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And we hope you've enjoyed it. And we want to encourage you to, again, find out about the NMRA online. Both PNR and NMRA have an excellent website where you can get information about joining and participating in this and other activities like our clinics that are held all over the region. So thank you for joining us today and wish you great modeling.